Everyone. Make sure that if you did not do so already while you were listening, not listening, on the 13th is 2 services. So the way that things used to be, where we have the traditional service at 8:30 and then the other service at 10:30, and then we'll have kids stuff in between. And of course, know this, that everything is subject to change. So this is our plan now, and if something happens medically or system-wide or something, then we'll adjust as we go along. And you just have to know that when we adjust, we will let you know as soon as we can know. So a little bit of grace on everybody's part, and we'll kind of make it through here. I'm moving the whiteboard out because we're going to need to talk about a few things this morning. If you can look up there, it's to the hills. And we're going to start with Psalm 121. Most of you, if you've ever been to a funeral or you've read through the Psalms, you're familiar with this one. And I'll explain why we picked To the Hills for the next series. But we were in staff and kind of working through some things and saying, what should we do next? Where should we go? And it was actually Lisa's idea, wherever Lisa's at. And Lisa's like, we should just straight up talk about people's fear and anxiety. Right now is a tense time, and between political things, election stuff, news that you watch, medical things that you hear from one expert here and a different expert there, and who do you trust and who do you know, and underneath it all you go, I don't know. So we're going to talk about it. And what we're going to do today is kind of intro the series. But what would be good right now is if you have a friend or a relative or a person that you know that isn't really plugged into church, now is a really good time to say, hey, I'd love for you to with me. And maybe that means that they don't feel comfortable in person, then doing that online with them. That's completely an option. Or inviting them to come with you, and if you spend time together, then sitting by each other. Because what we're doing is we're starting something new, but we're also poking at the little thing that most people don't want to talk about, but they really do want to talk about. You want to talk about the things that kind of keep you up at night, but at the same time you don't. When you don't talk about it, you give it more power over your life. And you have to eventually say, I'm not going to let it do that. And that's what our psalm points at this morning. The second thing is if you're in a small group, will you raise your hand for me? If you're in one of the small groups? You got to raise it a lot higher than that. Come on. My shirt will tear if I pull it too much further. You can see the tension right here. And y'all are like, so if you're not in a small group and you're like, I don't know how to get plugged in. Some of them do more things on Zoom. Some of them are face-to-face. Look to those hands that you saw, because really the way that you get plugged in a long-term fashion here is you'll come and eventually you'll either not like the music or not like the things that I say, but you'll still like the people that listen to you during the middle of the week. You'll like the people that when you say, I just really struggle with this, and they'll go, me too. Or they'll say, I don't, but how can I help you? Do you want to come over? When you don't know where to go, I'm here for you. That's what the small group thing is about. So really, now is a good time. We're just kicking things off for a whole new season. And of course, everything, remember, is subject to change, but we're going to do our best to try and get back to whatever normal is. So as we move in, just a bit of grace, and be willing to open yourself up to the oddity of talking about your fear, because that's what this series is totally about. It's about what are the fears that we have, and we'll get into that now. I'm going to pray, ask the Spirit to come and kind of bring some revelation, and then, it's all relevant anyway, and then we'll jump into a few things. I'll start with the psalm, and then I have a little bit of discussion time, okay? So, Spirit, I ask that you would come. I ask that you would take words that were written thousands and thousands, maybe 3,000 years ago, and bring them life today. Not that they would be something that's an old song, but it's something that we can hear and we can feel our own life and our story bleeding through the pages. So Jesus, this morning, let all the outside stuff quiet. Let the busyness of the week, let the anxiety of the things to come, let the whatever didn't go well this morning be that much softer in our minds so that we can hear you. Jesus truly be our teacher. Amen. If you have it, you can turn here. It'll be up on the slides, but of course, we live in a technological age where we forgot that slides never really look as good when they're up on a projector as they do on a computer screen, and so if you can't see them, my apologies. We will get some big magnifying glasses so that you can adjust. I actually had to tell Carrie the other day, this is a tangent, that I felt like my gramps the other day. I checked the oil on our car before we went out to the hills for the vacation with the kids, because that's what you're supposed to do. And then I went to put it back in, and I'm like, oh crap, I can't see the hole. Not because I couldn't see it, but it was like too dark. Like, I remember working on stuff at my gramps' house, and he had glaucoma, so he had these huge magnifying glasses with LED lights on everything, and he'd be like, you need me to get you a light in there? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. He's like, how can you see that? And I had that moment where I'm like, let me get my telephone out and turn the light on. Oh, there it is, right down there. And to my credit, it is kind of tucked around on the backside. It's an odd spot, but it's there. I should have known. But this morning, so we're looking here, Psalm 121, a song of ascents. So the thing to keep in mind here is as we get into this psalm, this is one of the psalms that is a pilgrimage psalm. So 3 times a year, the people of Israel were asked, quasi-commanded, to come to Jerusalem and have a celebration. And part of that was to bring their tithes and offerings that someday we'll actually talk about money throughout this series. If you're worried about tithes and offerings, the Israelites had to give up to 40% of everything that they made that year. So some years it was 30-some%, and some years it was 40-some%. So that's one of those things to keep in mind. But as they would do that, so they would come to Jerusalem, and it was these big kind of like pilgrimage parties, and so they would all journey together. And what they would do is sing the Psalms of Ascent. And then once they got to Jerusalem, many times it was used as a liturgical device. So there were a certain number of steps that went up into the temple. And so the priests would sing them. And a lot of them are kind of response, where you would say something and it would be back and forth. And then they go up the next step and they'd do Psalm 122 and Psalm 123. Some of this should be familiar to you if you were here during the Advent series. We went through some of these Psalms during Advent. As we approached one of our big celebrations, we used a historical set of psalms that were celebrative psalms. But as they're journeying, so it's a group of pilgrims that you can imagine from as far south as like Ethiopia. Remember Moses, one of his wives, was from Ethiopia. And as far north as who knows. And nowadays, you get, after the dispersion of all of the Jews, after the spreading out of the exiles to Babylon and Assyria, then you begin to have all of these people coming from different places, sometimes with regularity, sometimes not. But this is one of the first psalms that they sing. I lift my eyes to the hills. Now you can sort of see the picture in the background. Those are hills within this is actually the southern part of Israel, or what would have been Israel then. Real picture, I actually found one, and hopefully there's no copywriting or anything like that. I didn't claim it for anything. We're not making money on it, so we're good. I lift my eyes to the hills. So as they journey, they're looking up. Many times you don't walk on the top of the mountains and the hills, do you? Like has anybody been to the Black Hills? Most of the time you drive through the creeks and the canyons and the valleys, and you're in the low areas, so everywhere you look is up. And the question is, where does my help come from? Now, when we pause right here, the reality that should set in is it's a question because there is an anxiety. Now, if you were journeying from a different land or from a distance, or even from, just like Jesus, from Galilee into Jerusalem, there was always the possibility that somebody would be waiting. There's always the possibility you could get sick. There's always the possibility that your supplies would run out. You would get caught in a storm. There's a whole list of things that would make you a bit anxious and fearful. And the first response is, I lift my eyes to the hills. Now, that sounds like a good thing, right? Maybe it's not. When you read through the Old Testament, what was in the hills? The gods of Baal and the Asheran poles because they would put them on the high places. And so many times it wasn't always a good thing to look to the hills, but his first response is to look there. Now here's what I want to do is we're going to take a pause, and if you feel comfortable with the people around you, I need you to list off and tell them 5 things, maybe your top five I'm afraid of. I have a fear of, and if you just go with like spiders, well then, you know what? Those don't count. I mean, if you got a serious arachnophobia because you watched that stupid movie in like 1987, okay, I'll let that pass. But the majority of us don't really have that fear. I got the list. I have the list of all the fears. But what I want to do is see where we're at as a group. So to the people around you, I'll give you 48 and a half seconds to figure out what your top 5 fears are. And this can be real because I'm going to ask you and we're going to put them on the board. And you can tell me your neighbor, so it's not really yours type of thing. But are you ready? Ready, set, go. 48 and a half seconds. Got to talk fast. Who needs more time? Okay, I'll give you 10 more seconds. See? You quieted down. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to start over here. Give me some fears. Health. Forgive my spelling if we get to words where things get a little sketchy. I was raised on typing, not on writing with my hand necessarily, and so it auto-corrects everything. One more. Heights? Heights. Heights. I guess so. I before E except after C and sometimes Y and W. Is that right? Don't be confused, I am a highly educated individual. I spent a lot of money to learn that I cannot spell. Okay, I'll come right here. Give me some fears. Failure. Give me one more. Of not knowing. Okay, that's your 2. Give me 2. Noah. Snakes. Did you know, just because he said that, even animals in captivity that have never ever been around snakes before in their life will shudder away from snakes? They did a study with chimpanzees. Snakes are innately programmed into the majority of us that we're supposed to step back from them. Good work. Was that 2 for y'all? No, I need one more. Future. I'm not going to take that one because we got unknown. I'll give that future on there too. Give me another one. Alone. Come on, you're burning up my talking time here. I'm going to go over. Being back on the soundboard. Because everybody knows if something goes wrong, it's that person's fault. Even when they're like, I didn't do anything. I'm not writing that down. give me another one.
Continual civil unrest.
Civil unrest. One more.
Losing
Family.
family.
And I'll just loved ones, friends in that too, maybe. Okay, what do you got over here? I realize I moved that and then it messes with you guys. I'll just leave it in the middle. Good enough. Terrorism? I was on a barn screwing in steel when the radio went shh, and you heard the guy go, a second plane just flew in. I mean, most of you, if you go, where were you at September 11th when it happened, you go, oh. And then I remember sitting in the gas line like an idiot for like 3 hours with Carrie in her car, like, we got to get some gas. There's going to be no gas. What's going on? There was plenty of gas. We didn't know that at the time. Fear does crazy things to you. Okay, give me some over here. Homelessness. Right now I have a fear of splitting my pants. So if that happens, then just don't look behind me. One more. Rejection. Tanner, you got one? What do you got? Steve's not here anymore. We do okay now. Something you will learn, the closer you are with individuals at work, the more you learn their bathroom habits, and it's comical at times. Okay, so here's what we have. Is there any on here that somebody feels really strongly about that's not up here? Like something that you go, oh. Has anybody watched that show Alone? Don't watch it. Don't watch it. You get sucked in and they go off and they have no food and they're like, I just don't. And then their brains get weird. And okay, Lane, put up the next slide. This is from Chapman University and they do a fear study. The fear study is I can give you the whole list of how they actually do it. And some of it is slightly biased because they give you questions that you answer, yes or no, or 1 through 4, what your rank of fear is afraid, very afraid, not afraid at all. And so you can see, here's the list for 2019. Number 1, corrupt government officials. So corruption within the government. Number 2, pollution, lakes, rivers. Number 3 is that people I love would become seriously ill. 4 is pollution in drinking water. 5 is people I love dying. 6, air pollution. 7, cyber terrorism now. 8, extinction of plants and animals, global warming, not having enough money for the future. So that's the top 10 that as they go through and poll Americans, this is the list that they get. And they've got a list that's through 80-some, and we'll look at that in a second. But as you look at ours, you can see some of them match. Some of that is overlap. where as we go through, what we're going to do through the next kind of couple of weeks of the series is I'll take the top 5 or 6-ish and condense them down. So like, we will talk about pollution, but we won't talk about pollution of oceans, rivers, and lakes, and then pollution of drinking water and air pollution. We won't talk about all of those things individually. We'll have kind of categories that we'll go through. And some of this stuff where you might go, oh yeah, that does kind of bother me once we start talking about it, and maybe it doesn't at all. But you can see that almost 77% of the people that they talk to are struggling with corruption within the government. Now, that shows you that it's not necessarily partisan, because we're not a 70%, 30% sort of group, especially of the people that they contacted. What do you think the lowest, the things on the bottom are? So we'll just see, I'll give you the bottoms in a second, but give me some things that you think are on the bottom of the list. Spiders. I think they're actually in the middle. Clowns. If you had to rank clowns or zombies, which one you think people are more scared of? Oh, we're kind of split. Lane, why don't you put that up there? This is the bottom of the list. It doesn't go all the way to 100. The lowest thing that they can rank at 5.5% is animals. People are scared of dogs, rats, and they had a couple of other ones. And then ghosts, and then blood, and then clowns. Zombies beat out clowns. Anybody seen a zombie in real life? Ridiculous, isn't it? Strangers, and this is 2019, so then you have catching the flu from the flu vaccine. You can see that they didn't do a very good job. This is just a screenshot of their work. That's their misspelling, not mine. Don't send me an email. White people no longer being the majority in the United States, which is completely crazy, because you would have to have a 70% swing in the opposite direction to actually see that happen. And some of these things, the way that they ask the questions I look through, they're not necessarily biased or looking for things. They have just categories that they go from. Flying. Anybody scared of flying? 1. Raise your hand if you've flown in the last year. And you put your buckle on and you went, let's do this. Or you went, it's okay, right? You thought more about how far can I recline my seat back before the person behind me goes, come on, man, why are you reclining that far on me? No? Maybe it's just me. Germs was number 75, which I'm sure would take a precipitous leap in the 2020 study. Large volcanic eruptions, needles, influenza, all of those are at the bottom. It's interesting. There are things in here where people are more afraid of being unemployed is number 43. Dying is 44. As a whole, people are more scared of not having a job than dying. Break-ins actually are a little higher than restrictions from government and heights. Heights was number 41. Iran has nuclear weapons as number 33. Pandemic and major epidemic was 31 last year. See where that goes next year. Yeah. So there's a whole bunch. And you can look this stuff up. Chapman University, it goes way back. But here's what I want to point out. Lane, will you put the next one up there? This one shows on the left-hand side you have 2016 through 2019. So on the left, you see government corruption has been at the top for the whole time. But you see it was 60%. And when you get to 2019, you got 77%. Which you go, oh, okay. And then as you look through, you can see different areas where some things move around. But just look at number 5 in 2016. Number 5 was at 38.5%. 2019, number 5 was at 62.9, 63%. What you should get from this, I don't care about the specific things in there, is as a whole, We live and breathe a culture that cultivates fear. Fear cultivated. That's what we live in. Anxiety on the rise, fear on the rise, all of these unchecked feelings, all of these things of what ifs, maybes, I'm not sure if it's going to happen. As a whole, everything is on the rise. And this is just a short little snippet of all the other stuff. Like, don't get lost in the individual things. More so see that as a whole, we are more fearful now than we were just a few years ago. I mean, now just go wait for next year's. That's why we're talking about it. Now, some of this stuff you have to go, okay, why? And I'm going to do a little bit of a question and answer with you. But Lane, why don't you put the next one up there? This ball, $1.10. That's a pretty cheap deal. We're Dutch in here, right? We're down with that. The baseball bat cost $1 more than the baseball. How much does a baseball cost? 10 cents. 10 cents? 10 cents? 10 cents? No. $1, 5 cents is $1 more than a 5-cent ball. Now you have to think about it for a second, right? Here's where the mind bender trick comes. A sociological psychologist, mainly psychology, but does some sociological things, who actually won the Nobel Prize in economy, came up with a study, and he figured out that we, as human beings, have a fast part of our brain and a slow part of our brain. The fast part of our brain is the instinctive part, the gut part, the thing that tells us the answer right away. It's good or it's bad. It's back up from the snake or go forward. And then the other part is the part that really takes a minute and you have to think about it. So after you took a second, how many of you, just be honest, were like, oh yeah, $1, 10 cents. I was. And then you go, oh no, unless you were sitting there going, he's messing with me, so I'm not even going to answer. I'm not even going to think about it in my head. That's what most of you did. But the reality is we have an instinctual side that's a little quicker, and then we have the slow side. This is the rational part where you really think through things. So somebody says, oh, I really liked that. Oh, why did you like it? And then you have to think about it. Well, that doesn't actually tell you why you like it. It tells you why you think you like it. And some of you are going, what? But here's the thing. I flash things on the screen in a news media, on your Facebook feed, Instagram, and you're bombarded with all of these images, which we'll see further down the road how far images and stories go into shaping how your gut brain feels. And not the thinking brain that goes, oh, come on. Lane, will you put the next one up there? This is your lifetime odds of dying from these things as of the most recent study in 2018 when they compiled these things. Top one, oh, that's kind of hard to see up there. I should have made it bigger. Top one is heart disease. Just under 20%, 1 out of 6 of you in this room will die from heart disease. You said health. Cancer. Preventable death causes. One of the highest ones on the list, once you get past the major things, most of us probably aren't going to have to deal with opioid overdose, but 1 out of 98 will. Motor vehicle crash. You didn't put that on the list, but you have a higher likelihood of dying from that than me riding my motorcycle. Do you see that? Motorcycle is 1 out of 890. You're more likely to get hit walking along the road, pedestrian accident, than in a motorcycle crash. Now, is that because one is gruesome, one isn't? One is politicized, one isn't? Look over on the far right-hand side, the very last thing. Passenger on an airplane. This takes out account people that fly all the time, but passengers on an airplane. It was too few to even calculate any odds. Now, you would think that that would be higher, right? But that's not what the thinking brain says. The fear part is the thing inside that immediately grabs you and goes, ugh. You're more likely to die from being struck by lightning than on an airplane. Now that gets you, right? That tells you, like, just go out there and swim. Let the rain come. Don't worry about it. Dog attacks, hot surfaces and substances, some of those things you go, how is this possible? But this is the raw statistical data. This is not me shaping it, and it's from the National Safety Council. They compile all the information, they put it out there. Now, some of those, if you can look this stuff up, and they have different things on per year or per incident, and this is over your lifetime. Just like the psalmist, there are a lot of things to be scared of. Some of them are logical, some of them aren't. And he looks to the hills. He's journeying with a family in tow, usually, friends. It's usually a group that would travel. They are journeying to Jerusalem, and things don't always go well. I feel a little fearful. I lift my eyes to the hills. He's going to the temple of the Lord, and he still looks to the hills. We look to the hills. But they have different labels. Now it's NBC and ABC and Fox and CNN and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it might be. Immediately, if you have a little anxious moment, you go, I'm not really sure to think about this COVID stuff. Let's take a look. Right? I'm not really sure about all the things going on with school, with masks and not masks. Let's take a look. And we peruse the feed to get our information. Now, what part of your brain actually processes those things? Not this one, because you have to sit and stare at the numbers and go, oh, it's this one right here. It's this. And neurochemically, this is where a lot of the serotonin and neural receptors that go into your brain, dopamine, all gets processed within your guts. We let this make a quick reaction, and then we know. And we just don't do that. Or we do that. And the reality is some of us just need to step back and go, should I really be afraid of that? Verse 2, we find out why. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. I lift my eyes up to the hills where the Baals, the Asheran poles, and all of the other fake gods have their shrines. Even though I know they're not real, I still look. Even though I know Facebook isn't going to tell me anything unbiased, even though I know Fox has its own bias, CNN has its own bias, Kello has its own bias, whether you really know it, you have your own bias and you look for what you want to find anyway. We do it. The psalmist says, I looked in the wrong place, but I know that my help comes from the Lord. He made the dirt under my feet that I'm walking up. He made the hill that I just looked to. There's a reassurance, acknowledging. Now, many of us probably read through that psalm and go, I lift my eyes to the hills. Well, because the Lord is there. Well, no, the Lord is maybe at that point in Jerusalem on the hill, not hills, not all of the places out there. And so we think that that's comforting. And the psalmist immediately tells us, no, this is your comfort. This is the thing that centers you. You get one verse of, I'm feeling a little fearful. You get one verse of, here's really where it comes from. And then we move into verse 3. Now, if you actually have this on your telephone or in a Bible or something in front of you, what you should notice is there's a big swing. You get, I lift my eyes to the hills because I'm a bit scared. I don't know where my help comes from. Oh, that's right. My help comes from the Lord. He made everything. And then you get, He will not let your foot. Did you notice the grammatical shift? because the person that's writing the psalm knows it, this is when he turns to the rest of the people in the group. So imagine this group journeying to Jerusalem. They're feeling a bit anxious of whether people are going to take things from them and all the different possibilities. And that sits here. And he says, I know these things through and through, but he won't let you be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. The Lord doesn't sleep as if he needed to. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. So when you feel the most anxious, when you lay in your bed at night and all of the crazy thoughts that you've had throughout the day start to pile in one upon another, and you get to that place where you finally fall asleep, and then 3 a.m. comes and you kind of wake up and your brain goes, hey, let's start thinking about that again. God doesn't sleep. He's still there for you. Now, this isn't the psalmist saying it to himself. He's telling it to the people around him. And now you notice you have one verse of fear, one verse of affirmation, and then a whole bunch of verses of, in case you didn't get it in verse 2. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. Our moon by night is a little screen that looks like a telephone or your iPad, and you just stare at it forever. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. Now, the part that you can't tell because you don't know Hebrew, does anybody know Hebrew? Some of you might know a little bit. This is not just one of those regular sentences. So verse 1 and verse 2, I guess you might know Hebrew, actually. She didn't have to take it. Okay. So as the Hebrew expert in the room, when you read through verse 1 and verse 2, they're pretty straightforward. Once you get to verse 3, this is in a style that we call jussive. And by we, I'm talking about the academic we that lives within the heads of all the people that know this stuff. You know what that means to us? Nothing. But you know what it meant to the Hebrew people? This was a song that was a prayer. Jussive is a prayer. It's not just a statement of affirmation. It's not just I say this because I really believe it. It's a prayer. So I lift my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? Oh, man. My help comes from the Lord. He made heaven and earth. And I pray, these aren't statements of fact that you will never stumble, that you'll never have hard times at night, that you'll never have those moments where you feel like evil is encroaching in on you. This is the prayer that they would say to help them feel centered. So as we begin, this is where we begin. You have a whole list of unknowns and anxieties. I say Trump, I say Biden, I say Corona, COVID, opioids, motor vehicle accidents, terrorism, identity theft. I say all these things and they're triggers. And the reality is sometimes we have to go, my help is in the Lord. He made heaven and earth. He won't let me be moved. He won't let me stumble. He'll keep me while I'm sleeping. Even in my anxious moments, he's still there. But this is not the first place that we go, right? And that's okay, but you have to admit it. Even the psalmist admitted it. The very first line was, I didn't first look to the Lord, I looked to the hills. And that's not the right place. And then I checked it. That your gut will tell you, and sometimes it's real. And sometimes you have to go, brain, remind me. He won't let my foot be moved. He knows my coming out and my going. I'm not just a blip on the radar of life. When the anxiety raises, when the possibility of fear begins to encroach and it sneaks in your life, take a minute. And even when all of this inside tells you no, remind yourself, I looked to the hills and Mark Zuckerberg didn't help me. Even Mark Zuckerberg has all of his apps and everything taped up and microphones covered because he knows they're all watching you. I think that's 3 weeks from now that they're watching you. But the one that's always there is there when you lay your head down on your pillow, is there when you get up and you look in the mirror after your shower, is there when you're driving in the car and you don't know what to think, is there when you're sitting on the toilet going through your feed on Facebook or whatever, because nobody goes to the bathroom without their telephone anymore. It's disgusting, but we all do it. Don't share your phone. What I'm trying to get at here is no matter where you are, what you're doing, you still have one who watches out for you. But you have to remember it. You have to. And if you need a prayer, it's right there. Verse 3 on. You get 2 verses of actual statement of saying, oops, I messed up because I looked to the hills and I knew it wasn't there. And the Lord is there with me. He created all of it. And then a whole bunch of confirmation in case you didn't get it the first time. Because that's what we need. It's okay to have those anxious moments and go, Lord, I need you. It's sneaking in on me again. I need you. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us people that live in community. That's what makes us people that share stories. As we move through the next few weeks, what we'll do is we'll take that list of all of the top fears and we'll actually work our way backwards. So we'll not start with number 1 because I want to push that number 1 as close to November as I possibly can so that I can reassure you that no matter what happens, God's still God. And you know that story you learned when you were a little kid. He got the whole world in his hands. A few thousand years now, hasn't let anybody down. But we're still going to feel anxious about it. And we'll go through all of the list of the possible things that kind of get us. So this is a good time to be in a small group if you're not in one. Because if you got that moment and you need somebody to say, yeah, I got that too. Okay, Craig, Ben, you can come up. I'm going to pray. And then after I'm done, then that's your cue to stand up and start singing with us. Or leave. Just kidding, it's the door. The closer wasn't working. God, I ask that despite the things that we hold on to that are scary, despite the things that we hold on to that really aren't scary but we think they are, I pray that you would speak life. I pray that you would speak life against our anxieties, that you would speak peace against the craziness of the world, that you would help us to have clarity and vision and discernment to know that you are still there. In the morning when I rise, you're there. When I lay down in my bed, you're there. You knit us together in the depths. Before there was a hair on our head, you knew them. Lord, send us reminders when that anxiety and fear creeps in. In your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.